Welcome to the studios of the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. This time I would like to go into a very specific problem concerning a EU member state, but also a member state of the Council of Europe, Cyprus. In Cyprus there have been a lot of problems concerning just one specific problem called missing persons. And one of the disadvantages in the so-called Annan Plan, which was put forward by the, at that time, Secretary General of the United Nations, was that it didn't indicate how to solve especially that problem. Mr. Erk, you are one of those who have been hit by this missing person problem. In which way?
Well, that's a very unfortunate fate that we lived through since 1963. In 1963, Christmas of 1963, my father went missing in the intercommunal conflict in Cyprus between the Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots. And my father went missing on the 23rd of December.
Can you shortly describe in which way what happened?
My father was a prison warden and he was on duty. And he had a heart attack while on duty, and he was hospitalized. That was on the 21st of December, 1963.
In a Greek or Turkish Cypriot hospital?
That was a general hospital for both communities, actually. It was the official in Nicosia. It was a state's hospital. And he was hospitalized to there, and we visited him on the 21st and 22nd of December in hospital. And on the 23rd of December, the intercommunal conflict became a war, actually. And he disappeared from the hospital. And what we heard is that his colleagues from the prison, central prison, together with the Greek Cypriot militia members, EOGA, they went to the hospital, took him from his bed, and killed him on the premises of the hospital. That is the official general hospital of the state. Killed him there. And then they throw the dead body to a water well, which was there for about 45 years till he was discovered, he was found there and exhumated and returned to us.
Why are you involving yourself in the committee for missing persons when your father was found?
Now, this is something that you feel attached emotionally, and you share the feelings, you know the feelings, and it is a closure for us as a private family, as our family. It's a closure for us. Our father has been found and returned, but there are still many, many missing persons, and I feel very related to all the missing persons families, regardless of Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot ethnic origin. And it doesn't mean that since my dossier is closed, the case is closed for me. I have to support and help and try for the other missing persons families in their efforts to find their beloved ones as well. So I am still concerned and connected with these families and activities of the Cyprus Missing Persons Committees.
What makes you think that it shall be still the main problem when it comes to finding a solution? It's a new generation now. How long should this problem be one of the main issues?
It is one of the main issues of the Cyprus problem. It has been a wound, a social wound for many families in Cyprus. That is altogether about 2,000 families, both in Greek and Turkish Cypriot side. And without finding the remains of the missing persons and returning them to the families and burying them with a funeral, it doesn't close. You need the closure. So whether it is 40 years, 50 years, it doesn't matter. Whether there is a change in the generation, it doesn't matter. The wound is there. Still, the person or the family is missing. And the expectation is to have the remains and to bury them. And then it is the closure for the family. And for the Cyprus problem, this is a very important matter for all Cypriots. To settle the Cyprus problem, you have to settle the property issue, territory issue, blah, blah, blah. But you have to settle the missing persons issue. because it is a person who is expected by the family, and it's an issue where the criminals are still in the communities, and they are not tried, they are not brought before the court. So it is a case that the families need a closure, and it's a case that law needs to try them.
But you have said yourself it's a kind of war which was going on in Cyprus. If I think about the war between Germany and France, First, Second World War, hundreds of thousands of soldiers are still missing, so to speak. No one knows what happens. If people were still suffering the way you do, I understand fully the tragedy behind a missing person. But if they were suffering the same way as you are and using this for not finding a solution between the two sides of the island, there would be no peace in Europe even, because Germany and France today are close friends, or at least they say so, even having not solved the problem of missing persons.
Yes, I understand that. What we want is the efforts to find the missing persons. If at the end of the efforts that's our will. If after the efforts the remains are not found, but told to the families that sorry, but the remains will not be found, that is another closure. And for the Cyprus case, to settle the Cyprus problem, we need to settle this matter. We need to close it, whether by finding the remains or telling the relatives that it's not possible, and having the closure, and also asking for pardon of doing this ill behavior to the families. That is another closure. Then the rapprochement between the two sides is very important. For sustainable peace, we have to have rapprochement activities and develop confidence with each other. With this missing persons case, stayed in ambiguity, without being resolved, without honoring the families, it's difficult to build rapprochement and confidence between the two sides. The officials of the two sides should pardon themselves for the missing persons, for what they have done. In a war, the military people, yes, they go missing. But in our case, almost all of the Turkish Cypriot missing persons were civilians, not military people. They were taken from the hospital. They were taken on the route to their work. They were taken from their houses. They were civilian people, not fighting in military positions. That's not how they went missing. For the Greek Cypriot side, 55% of the missing persons are military and 45% are civilians. So I am not making any difference between the Turkish and Greek missing persons. They are all the same for me. And my effort is for all the Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot missing persons families. We all need a settlement. And what we need is the efforts to find, if not possible, to tell the families that it won't be possible, and officially asking for an excuse, asking for pardon. That settles the feeling.
Why hasn't this happened?
The two sides, the authorities of the two sides actually preferred to use this case as a political game, as a political instrument to defeat the policies of the other side, to have a blame game. And the two sides, the leaders, were reluctant actually to deal with this matter on technical basis without politicizing it. It was very easy for them to blame the other side, saying that since 1963 we have 200, and after 1974 we have 500 missing persons as Turkish Cypriots, and for the Greek Cypriots to say since 1974 events we have 1,500 missing persons, and you see the families, how they are suffering, they are waiting for their beloved ones to return. It was all a political game, blame game for them as an instrument to score goals against the other side.
How to stop this?
How to stop this? The Cyprus Missing Persons Committee work, which is non-political and it is on technical basis.
You are a member.
Yeah, yes, and they try to find evidence of what has happened and to spot where the burial is, to exhumate, get the remains, make the DNA tests, identify the person.
For both sides?
For both sides, and return the remains. In missing persons case, I have no ethnic background. I am a relative of a missing person, and I feel the same as a Greek Cypriot, as a Turkish Cypriot, as an Israeli, as a Pakistani, or as a Palestinian, as a Vietnamese, or as an Argentinian. It's all the same for me. All the missing persons worldwide should be found and should be returned to their families. That's my behavior. So the politicians, they prefer to use this as an instrument. Now in Cyprus, the Missing Persons Committee is trying to find and return. They have succeeded with about 200 of the missing persons, and their efforts are still continuing, especially with the DNA tests, to identify the remains and to return the families. This is how it should be continued, without any political involvement, without being any political intervention, and without taking this as a matter to the international institutions to blame and condemn the other side. We don't need this. All we need is a closure.
But let me finalize our conversation here about this tragedy by asking you, there are areas where you cannot go in to make your finding missing people.
Exactly. We have military areas. We have ceasefire conditions in Cyprus, and we have armies in Cyprus, and we have fenced areas, military areas, where access to these areas is granted, is permitted by the military authorities. We have already done exhumations in 20 military areas in the north, where we still have about 200 non-military areas waiting for exhumations. So making this as a big issue, that military is not granting permission, is disinformation. Military is granting the permission, and in 20 areas exhumations were carried out, and we have more than 20, we have more than 200 non-military areas which needs to be exhumated. Why should we insist on having access to the military area, whereas we have 200 other non-military areas where we can continue with the exhumations? And it is not right to blame the Turkish military, because they have already granted the permission. But we still have some military areas to be exhumated, and we still have a lot of non-military areas for exhumation activities.
Mr. Loukaides, you are coming from the Greek Cypriot side, your name is indicating that, but how do you feel when the question of missing person is raised again and again and again?
This issue was raised for decades, I would have to say. And it was raised also by my political party, my political group in Cyprus,
which is
Kohl. And our approach was and still the same. We're talking about a humanitarian issue, and it shouldn't be connected with the lack of the Cyprus problem as a whole. It should be connected with a comprehensive settlement. It should have been solved many years ago. So regardless the possible developments in the Cyprus problem, this issue should be given a solution. 40 years, it's too late. If we go back, we're talking about 50 years, because conflicts exist in Cyprus, unfortunately, since 1964. Of course, from 1963, end of 63, December of 63, 64. Its character changed, of course, after 1974, as you very well know. We're talking about a problem of foreign intervention, of invasion, of occupation after 1974 by Turkey against a recognized state from the United Nations, a member of the European Union.
But due to the Zurich-London Agreement of 1960.
According, as you say, to the London Agreements of 1960, we're talking about an independent state. that received.
But we're also talking about 3 guarantee powers who were obliged to intervene if either Taksim or Enosis was on the agenda.
No, such a possibility was not given. It's against international law. It's against the charter. No military intervention was possible, and it is possible. And that's why there were resolutions of the United Nations condemning the invasion, the Turkish invasion in the island. So the problem took a different character after 1974. We're talking about a much more huge number of missing persons that exist. But what is important and still is important is that a solution would have been given and must be given. Fortunately, there are positive developments concerning this issue. The faith of a number of Greek Cypriots and a smaller number of Turkish Cypriots was already clarified. Unfortunately, we are burying our compatriots. Every week we have funerals burying the remainings of those people.
Still remains found.
Yes, and there are many to be found, and we have to hurry up in this direction.
When we see the Annan plan, the so-called Annan plan, there is not a real mentioning of missing persons. Is that one of the reasons why Greek Cypriots rejected the plan?
Look, I don't think that was one of the main reasons that it was rejected. The main reason was that, in general, that plan was not considered to be a fair and balanced plan for both communities, for the people of Cyprus as a whole. That was the main reason, and I would say more about this, that feelings of insecurity raised at that time, and some other important provisions that were existing in that plan. But that was almost 10 years ago. A new effort started for a solution of the Cyprus problem. Unfortunately, we are saying that the intransigence of the Turkish side didn't allow it to go on. Now we have a new leadership in the Greek Cypriot community of the Cyprus Republic. The president of the Cyprus Republic is representing the Greek Cypriot community in the talks. That's why I placed it in that way. Hopefully there will be developments in the forthcoming period that will lead us to a solution.
To have developments.
Excuse me?
What will it take?
Goodwill, especially from the country that still has the key for the solution.
Which is Turkey.
Which is Turkey. Turkey is controlling the Turkish Cypriot community, by military terms, through financial terms, because it also is financing the...
But Mr. Lukoy, so who is actually representing the North today? We have a lot of Turkish citizens who came to the island and became citizens in the Republic in the North. Who is your opponent? Those who came and became, even after the war, citizens in the North, or Turkish Cypriots? Can you still see who is who?
This is the other aspect. I was talking about military control, financial control, but also political control through the settlers, because the settlers are already a majority in the occupied areas of the island.
They probably don't have the same kind of feelings towards missing persons.
No, not about the missing persons, not about the perspective of the solution. They are of different culture from the Turkish Cypriots. We have
different interests.
And different interests, more and above all. I'm coming from a party from which we did have and still do members of the party that are Turkish Cypriots.
Okay.
We are a Cypriot party, not a Greek Cypriot party, political party. So our relations through the decades with the Turkish Cypriots and our ideology, I would say, was always in favor of the peaceful coexistence of the two communities,
in favor of
the approachment of the island at the end of the day. Yes, of course. So this issue with the settlers is an aspect of the Cyprus problem that it is making difficult to reach a solution, because those settlers, I wouldn't say in an absolute way, but in general, they are controlled by Turkey, by the administration in Turkey, whenever it is.
But in your opinion, what is the solution?
The solution should be based on international realistic solution. It should be a compromise, of course, after so many years, but it should be based in the principles of the European Union, of the Charter of the United Nations, of international law, in the decisions taken by the United Nations for Cyprus, and there are several decisions of the Assembly and of the Council. And there are agreements between the two sides. 1977 and 79 agreements between Magarios and Dektash and Spiros Kyprianou and Dektash, and then Christofias and Talat also proceed with agreements before the restarting of there were no agreements between the two sides.
We're getting very close.
We had at that time ideas by proposals, I would say, from Boutros Ghali. But there is a framework talking about a bizonal, bicommunal federation of the island, in the island, providing
for UN Secretary.
Former UN General Secretary, yes. I'm speaking like everybody knows about him. So we're talking about the bizonal, bicommunal federation, which will be an evolution of the unitary state that 1960s agreements are providing. And I believe this it's not the ideal solution for the Cyprus people and Cyprus question, but it's the only possible solution that could be accepted by both communities.
But I have the feeling, you might correct me, that it is a general attitude in the south that everyone has realized, or almost everyone has realized, that you cannot go back to the total former situation, which was with Greek Cypriots generally having the island and then enclaves on Turkish Cypriots. Well, where lies, so to speak, the compromise there?
Look, the Turkish Cypriot federal unit will be governed by Turkish Cypriots, and it will be in the north. Of course, there should be territorial changes. The territorial issue is one of the main issues. A part of the occupied areas should be given under the Greek Cypriot unit, federal unit. This is a huge compromise. A part of the island will remain under the governance of the Turkish Cypriots. This is accepted, and this is a huge compromise. Of course, having in mind what happened in 1974 and the years after. So, in that direction, I think that the bizonal, bicommunal federation is really a decent compromise, having in mind all the circumstances and all the developments.
Let me finalize our conversation here about Cyprus by asking you perhaps a little bit an emotional question. You have UN soldiers, blue helmets, to take care of the island's security since 1964, almost 50 years. Are you scared of Turks today?
Look, the security issue is an issue that is raised by ordinary people. Of course, after what happened in 1974, as I'm a displaced person.
But still, that's 40 years ago.
It's 40 years ago, yes. But emotions remain. I mean, Turkish Cypriots may fear from Greek Cypriots. We are afraid from Turkey. But what I have to say, and I feel, being emotionally, is that we have to leave our fears behind. Take them into account. I'm talking about both Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. take these fears into account but leave them behind at the same time in order to build a new future for our island, for the generations to come. This is our obligation. The situation is unacceptable. The status quo, the partition of the island is unacceptable. It cannot be viable, this situation. And it will generate more and more dangers for the people of the island, the whole people of the island, Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. So we have to proceed with a comprehensive settlement, solution of the Cyprus problem, in order to have a peaceful and to offer a peaceful future for our children and grandchildren. This is our obligation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Peter Maurer, you are the president of the International Red Cross Committee, and you have appeared here at the Council of Europe in order to say a few words about missing persons. How big is this problem to our world today? Because it seems to be a very, very vulnerable question, but only in certain areas. Am I wrong, all right?
Well, it is definitely an issue, a long-time issue out of conflicts with which the ICRC is dealing for many decades now. What we see is that aid and support and protection work is not only necessary in conflict when conflict happened, but there are long-term effects. And the issue of the missing is one of the most crucial long-term effects in conflict. Those families who do not know about the fate of their loved ones, for them it is a huge burden to live in insecurity. And contrary to what you may expect, this is not an issue which gets smaller as we move forward in time. It rather gets bigger.
But what is the background for this specific problem? Is it used as a political weapon? Is it used to intimidate people? Why do we have still these problems of missing persons?
Well, there are, of course, most of the missing are missing because of armed violence, of violent events.
Even massacres.
Which have been probably at the origin of or consequences of human rights and international humanitarian law violations. So those in power after armed conflict normally do not wish to be reminded about the origin of those missing. And so it is a very delicate issue also in reconciliation. Our approach has always been only if there is truth-finding after conflict, if those who are missing can be accounted for, we can also have reconciliation processes in society. So the information about the missing is often used in order to cover up what has happened during the conflict, rather than to use openness and information as a tool to reconcile.
But what, to me at least, knowing a little bit about Cyprus is ununderstandable, unacceptable, is that for almost 50 years now the conflict is going on without solving these basic problems to the people on both sides, Turk side and the Greek side of the Cypriot population.
Well, we do think at ICRC as well that it is unacceptable that information is withheld. Organizations, NGOs and organizations like the ICRC are hindered to do the work of looking for those missing in a conflict, and that this is used as a tool of politicking. And therefore ICRC has always taken the view that we have to have a neutral, impartial, independent humanitarian approach to these issues. The issue is about bringing the information to the families, to the survivors.
Yeah, but on the island, there is for almost 50 years a UN peacekeeping force present. Shouldn't they be the one to deal with this problem?
Well, I think, I think it is better if neutral and impartial institutions do it, and that we keep this separate from a political, military and peacekeeping operations. Even the UN, while I think it is certainly in certain circumstances possible, if there is agreement between the parties, that the UN is doing this work. If there is disagreement still on the issue of the missing, it is maybe better that organization with a clear humanitarian profile can come to the theaters of operation.
But can you give those poor, suffering people any kind of hope that even after no solving the problems for 50 years, you can solve them?
There is always the hope in our consistency and persistence, and wherever we work in the world, we have not given up on the missing. It has become one of the big areas of activities of ICRC.
You are confronted with a lot of challenges at the moment. We could take Syria, we can take these horrible circumstances at the island of Lampedusa and so on. How do you foresee how you can tackle all those problems? There must be a kind of limit to your resources. You have to negotiate, you have to go into the field, and.
Well, we are indeed in our operations from Syria to Afghanistan to Colombia and the DRC. We are limited with a whole series of issues. The most important certainly is limitations to access and threats to the security of our staff. Which is the most important and recurring problem with which we are dealing.
And you're rejecting military protection?
We are rejecting military protection, and we are relying on negotiating with all arms bearers our humanitarian activities. We rely on the protection of the Geneva Conventions, of the emblem, of reminding parties to the conflict what international humanitarian law prescribes, the right of civilian populations and the wounded and sick in the field to get assistance from neutral and impartial organizations. So we do negotiate our accesses and security arrangements all over the world, but it is becoming increasingly complicated because power and powers are fragmented, and we find ourselves not with clearly structured organizations, but with a multiplicity of actors, which makes it increasingly difficult to negotiate such arrangements.
Is it difficult to negotiate with your Muslim counterpart, or is it the same kind of understanding of how to tackle, how to go into challenges as from your side?
It's not a question of religious orientation. It's a question of what in a specific context, what the respective organizations, how they are structured, how they are looking at international involvement and international actors. In some areas of the world we have successes more than in other areas. Some areas are more complicated. There is no question that the Syrian context today is one of the most complex contexts. In other countries, like for instance last year in the north of Mali, we had quite good successes, although these were very radical Islamic groups, but we had certain successes in organizing our access. So it depends on contexts and situations.
One of the most tragic situations is the one North Africans trying by all means to get to Europe, believing that's where heaven is to be found, and drowning. Hundreds of people have drowned throughout the last years. How to prevent instead of just going in and finding dead bodies?
Well, the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement has increasingly been concerned by the humanitarian impact of population moves, and we have found that the approach of the international community to look first and foremost at legal status and try to distinguish refugees from economic migrants, from other forms of population movement is increasingly problematic, because it does not allow us to tackle in a satisfactory way the issues with which we are confronted. We are confronted with serious humanitarian destinies in the course of migratory movements. We are confronted with crimes and criminals who use migrants and threaten them and extort money from them. And all these issues cannot be tackled in an easy way. We try to look at the humanitarian problems around migrant flows, and with national societies, in cooperation with national societies and ICRC, to bring at least some humanitarian relief to those problems.
I wish you luck, Mr.
Thank
Maurer.
you very much. Thank you.